If you haven't heard of Kelly Gallagher yet, today is the day he will gain celebrity English teacher status in your mind. In fact, I might call him a Jedi Master of promising practices in the world of literacy education. Gallagher is a veteran secondary teacher who has taught in both California and New York. Having spent over 2 decades in the classroom, he has a lot to say about the practice of being an English educator, which has allowed him to become a very prolific writer. This week, I'm going to share pearls of wisdom from his 2015 book, In the Best Interest of Students, staying true to what works in the ELA classroom, as well as some of my own thoughts that relate to this book. At the end, I will leave you with some questions to consider for your own practice, specifically with regard to how you can stay true to your core pedagogical principles for literacy education while being responsive and flexible in light of the changing nature of teaching. Now, Gallagher's book is grounded in 3 key lessons. Lesson 1, avoid falling in love with the standards. They won't be here forever. Lesson 2, recognize that the standards by themselves are necessary, but insufficient. And Lesson 3, remember that good teaching is not about covering a new list of standards. Good teaching is grounded in practices proven to sharpen our students' literacy skills. Let's start with Lesson 1. Essentially, this lesson asks us to be critical of the standards because while they do outline what needs to happen in our classrooms, they are not the final word on the subject. Now, Gallagher's a reasonable and wise man, and he has seen many shifts in the educational culture around standards and testing. He recognizes that the Common Core actually has a lot of potential for creating a consistent bar in terms of rigor and proficiency across the United States. But as he says, they won't always be around. In my own experience over the past decade of teaching, I've seen Michigan shift away from the grade level and high school content expectations, which your teachers probably used if you went to school in Michigan. And then I saw them move to the Common Core. I also saw it in the ESL world. We shifted from Michigan's English language proficiency standards to the WIDA English language development standards. In fact, I had the opportunity to be at the table with Michigan Department of Education when the folks in the ESL world were writing a proposal advocating for this shift, a conversation that was super enlightening and a little intimidating to be a part of. Both changes required a fair amount of revision to curriculum, and from my perspective, they led to some tremendous improvements in what was being targeted in ELA and ESL instruction. Point is, just like all things in education, the work we do is constantly evolving, arguably because it is in the best interest of students. Gallagher spends the better part of the book delineating lessons 2 and 3, what works and doesn't work with the standards, as well as sharing instructional practices that can ensure you're doing what's best for your students. As a side note regarding those practices that he goes over, this book is chock full of strategies that you can implement to support reading, writing, listening, and speaking standards in your instruction. So check that out. Now, with regard to Lesson 2, the current standards reflect a lot of growth in terms of perceptions and philosophies of what effective language and literacy instruction looks like. The Common Core also reflects some consideration of what we have learned is developmentally appropriate for students and what will best serve them in the real world. But they're not enough. As masters of our craft, of English, of learning, and of English education, we ultimately decide what is in the best interest of our students, which we balance with our response to the standards and the assessments that go along with them. Gallagher makes me think of the cliche, I'm a teacher of students, not a teacher of English, because as he emphasizes, giving too much power to the standards and tests dehumanizes the work we do and leads to undesirable results, like a teacher or school cheating on standardized tests or instruction being dedicated to teaching to the test. The big one for me is the ways in which these educational behemoths undermine teachers' expertise and their dedication to learners. Arguably, it makes a lot of educators feel disempowered because they are told what should be taught, and that doesn't always line up with what they know to be best in terms of how to actually teach. I can think of an example from this past year where my school district was revising the English language arts curriculum, and one of the head administrators asked me about the ways in which my ESL curriculum was matching up with it. Now, I had spent a lot of time over the past 2 years looking at the ESL curriculum and aligning it with the Common Core state standards in English. But that did not mean I was going to choose the same texts It also just didn't mean that I was going to choose texts that were considered to be on grade level for my English learners. Just because they're in ninth grade, obviously, that doesn't mean they can read ninth grade level texts. So for me, this is where the art and science of teaching comes into play. In order for teachers to effectively plan, instruct, and measure mastery of these standards, we need support to do what is educationally sound, not threats against the good work we do. And this dovetails with lesson 3 for Gallagher. He says, quote, "Remember that good teaching is not about covering a new list of standards. Good teaching is grounded in practices proven to sharpen our students' literacy skills." To bolster his argument, Gallagher references many promising practices in language and literacy learning, practices that echo what you may have heard from NCTE, NWP, and IRA. And as you'll learn, my beliefs around literacy education very much align with the notions promoted by these organizations. Students need to read like writers and write like readers. They need to be apprenticed into the world of language and literacy to develop the habits of mind that will allow them to gradually take on more and more difficult texts in reading and to explore the craft of writing in authentic contexts. As Gallagher argues, students' reading and writing experiences should prepare them to, quote, "think about, to understand, to gain greater insight into the world they are about to inherit. Books worthy of study should be rehearsals for the real world. They should be springboards to close examination of what is happening in the here and now." And this work should be purposeful, meaningful, and authentic. People engage in reading and writing in the real world for real reasons, and so should our learners. Ultimately, Gallagher is arguing for a balanced perspective of the Common Core. As he says, let's take the best of what the Common Core reading standards have to offer while remaining acutely aware of their shortcomings. And where the new standards come up short, let's take the steps necessary to ensure that our core values in the teaching of reading are not sacrificed. This also applies to the teaching of writing and listening and speaking. It means that we should trust our gut and what we know is best for our students. Push against the standards and testing when you know it's in the best interest of your kids. I tend to think that if you're wondering who's behind the standards, you're on the right track. Being an expert in a particular content area, like the folks who wrote the Common Core state standards, doesn't mean expertise in teaching, and especially expertise in teaching literacy. And so I think that we should all respond to Gallagher's call to action. Quote, "Let's step away from teaching to another series of tests that narrow our instruction. Instead, let's direct our focus on what we know works when it comes to teaching students how to read, write, listen, and speak. Let's focus on what's in the best interest of students." So what does this mean for you, new Jedi Master of all that is English language and literacy instruction? It means that you need to be able to cite what you believe and why you believe it. So here are some questions to get you thinking about this. First, if you were to synthesize your key beliefs about what is in the best interest of students with regard to language and literacy learning, what would be on your top 5 list? Why do you believe these things? Are there parts of the Common Core that resonate with you? Or are there parts that make you bristle? Why do you think this is? Here's my final word on the matter. One of the most challenging parts of entering the field of education is knowing and feeling like you are a master of your craft. This means that you have to have a clear idea of what you believe and what you can turn to back up those beliefs. This also means that you know that teaching is in many ways an experiment. As a result, it's okay for those beliefs to evolve. In fact, one of my beliefs about being an effective educator is that critical thinking and reflection and growth are key. But I also know that I will need to draw a hard line sometimes because I know what's in the best interest of my kids. There you have it. If you want to borrow in the best interest, or if you want to chew over it with me, let me know. Happy teaching.